So I just read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I've never read any Wells before. This is my first book, and really short. It's like novella, 100 pages or less than 100 pages. Sci-fi, very early sci-fi. I think this was published in 1896. It's like super, super early. And it's pretty cool. I mean, you read it in one sitting. It's not that really in-depth, like a lot of stuff is built, a lot of sci-fi is built on stuff that came before, right? So this is sort of pretty entry-level stuff, but it's essentially the story of this guy, the time traveler. No one really has names in this. Actually, there's one character that has a name, but the main sort of protagonist, the POV guy, is this guy, the time traveler. And I guess not the POV. The POV is shown, it's through the lens of this one guy relating to us this time traveler's story as related to him by the time traveler. So it starts with this guy, our narrator, we don't know who he is, in this Victoria era room with a whole bunch of Victorian dudes, and one of them's this guy, the time traveler. And he brings out this time machine that he's created, this miniature model, and shows it disappear through time. And he explains how the sort of the three-dimensional world that we see is actually a fourth dimensional world, the fourth being time. So there's the three dimensions of space, and then the fourth dimension of time, and everything sort of exists in these four dimensions because everything passes through time, which I guess was a new idea at the time. Anyway, so he has shown that this model thing goes through time. And the next day or sometime later, our narrator comes back to the house of the time traveler again for like an evening meal. There's a bunch of other dudes hanging around there, and the time traveler's gone. They don't know where he is. They're sort of waiting for him to show up, and someone says, "Oh, he told me start dinner without him if he's a bit late." But then suddenly the door opens and the time traveler appears, and he is quite disheveled, to put it mildly. He's missing his shoes, he's cut and bruised, and he's dirty, and he's like, "Look, I gotta go upstairs and get changed and clean up, and then I'll come down and I'll tell you all about it." And that's exactly what he does. So he sits down and he's like, "I traveled through time." And the rest of the book is a recounting of his time traveling story. And so this isn't like he goes ahead 100 years or whatever. He travels 800,000 years in the future, which is kind of crazy. And the world he encounters there is unsurprisingly much different than our own. So through the course of a sort of a week of exploring this world, he encounters what is remained of humanity. And humanity has sort of branched into two subspecies. These beings called the Eloi and these beings called the Morlocks, which are, it's like biblical terms. Morlocks, like Molech, it's sort of, I don't know if it's a Canaanite god or it's seen as sort of an evil thing in the Bible, and Eloi is one of the names of God. But these Eloi, they are very childlike. They are described as being very small. They are very lacking in intelligence. They are very simple beings. They don't really do anything. They live a life of luxury. There seems to be no predators, nothing to hurt them. Fruit grows everywhere that they eat. They do have very nice clothes that are made for them somehow, which we find out later, but they don't work. They live in these like old palaces that are really crumbling and falling apart. They have no way to repair them. And they gave me very Hobbit vibes, not in terms of their personality, but just in terms of looks. Sort of very elfin, very cute, very sweet. Almost sexless, genderless, which is explained by the author, by the narrator, as through evolution. This had been the aristocracy, and because there have been sort of no evolutionary pressures pushing them to have intelligence or strength or anything, these are the wealthy, aristocratic or plutocratic capitalists of the future that, because they live off the exploitation of workers and whatnot, they have no need to work. So they have no need to be strong, to be intelligent. They just live their life of ease. And so they've developed into these near sexless, childlike beings. And they just frolic around and play with flowers and eat fruit. The other subsection of humanity, if the Eloi are the hobbits, then the Morlocks are sort of Gollum characters. They are subterranean creatures. They are blind to light, but they have really big eyes, and they're really pale and like long thin hair, sort of run on four legs or hunched like an ape. And these are sort of the descendants of humanity who had been the sort of working class, who had been pushed underground to work in factories and to do all this work for these sort of the wealthy class, and they had turned into these Morlock creatures. And throughout the course of the story, we determine the relationship between the Morlocks and the Eloi. At first, there seems to be no connection, but then it begins to be revealed that the Morlocks are sort of preying on the Eloi, and the Eloi really fear the dark. In the dark, on these sort of moonless nights, the Eloi, or the Morlocks, come out and attack the Eloi. And the time traveler discovers this by stupidly, in my opinion, crawling down into one of these wells into the subterranean network of caverns that the Morlocks inhabit without a torch or whatever. He has a handful of matches, but the matches don't really do anything other than a sort of a hindrance to the Morlocks to allow him to escape. But he before he manages to escape, he does see that the Morlocks are eating some sort of a meat, some sort of raw flesh, and the lack of fauna can only suggest that it is the Eloi. The Morlocks have become sort of cannibalistic in a way. They're eating their fellow sort of humans. They're still the same species. And it's revealed that the Morlocks seem to be farming the Eloi. They're the ones looking after their clothing and what little needs they have and predating upon them for food. Which, if that's not a comment on capitalist two-class system of haves and have-nots, I don't know what is. But our time traveler, by the way, his time machine when he arrives has mysteriously been moved into this locked building, locked room that he cannot get into, and he's constantly trying to find a way to get in through these brass doors and get his machine back. He sort of befriends one of the Eloi. He saves this girl from, or this I guess woman, I don't know. They're so childlike. This girl from drowning, and she sort of imprints on him, and he carries her around like his child, and he visits this place which turns out to be a museum, which I thought, oh, we're going to get a sort of a reveal of the past 800,000 years of history, but no, he just finds some airtight sealed matches in there and manages to break a piece off of a machine and use that as a crowbar / club and heads back to where the time machine is. He then at night gets assaulted by a whole bunch of Morlocks and there's a big fight. Weena, the Eloi that he'd been with, like dies or gets taken away or eaten or whatnot. We don't really know her fate. It's assumed she's dead, but he manages to fight them off after the forest catches fire and gets to his time machine. When he gets back to the place, he notices the doors have been open, and so he goes inside and the door's immediately shut. It's a trap, but he's like, so it's my time machine. I don't need to get out. I can just hop on it and time travel away. And that's what he tries to do, but he's attacked by Morlocks, so there's a bit of a fight, and it was actually a bit of a tense moment. Like, I'm like, is he going to get to it? The fact that he's relating this story to the narrator tells us that he does eventually get back, but we still don't know how. But he does manage to fight them off and gets on his time machine. And this is an interesting part. He doesn't then immediately go back to the present and tell the story. He then chooses to go forwards in time, and he keeps going forwards and forwards millions of years. And this is sort of a weird sort of almost a 2001 Space Odyssey ending where it's like strange space baby, although not quite. But he keeps going ahead further and further and stopping and seeing the world, the Earth, sort of turned very alien, where there is no signs of intelligent life whatsoever, and all life is these weird monster creatures. And the air, the oxygen is much thinner, and the sun is much closer and bigger and redder. And he goes even further ahead, and Earth seems quite barren at this point. Except there's this one creature, octopus-like creature near the shore that he thinks is inanimate, but then it moves, and so it shows that there's still some life, but it's really dying out. And he's sort of there at the end of all things, in despair, before he gets back on the time machine and travels back to the present and relates his events to our narrator. So yeah, that last part was really different. It was quite sci-fi to, go further and further ahead and see sort of how kind of meaningless everything is, because like nothing gold can stay, all will turn to ash and decay. And then the very end is sort of an epilogue where the narrator reveals a time when he goes and visits the time traveler again, just as the time traveler is going off on another time traveling adventure. And it's revealed that this happened 3 years ago, and there's been no sign of him since. So we don't know what sort of adventures he went off and had, if he died in those adventures or lost access to the time machine and has been sort of stuck in time or whatnot. But that is the end. So really short, to the point, very much sort of a take, like all sci-fi should be, a weird science fiction twist on using sci-fi as sort of a setting to relate a sort of societal issue, that being a major one in the end of the 19th century, about capitalism and labor issues and society and class, stuff like that. So that was H.G. Wells's The Time Machine.